Well, it looks like Harvey has found himself in some trouble again.
No, did you ever get an apology?
Never got an apology from Steve. He never said anything. My thing is I wrote new jokes.
You're saying his business ethics are like really solid. Like he's treating you guys like
he treats us like golden. Are you crazy?
Yeah.
We're gold.
Steve Harvey's billion-dollar empire might be shining on the outside, but behind the scenes, it's built on something darker: lies and stolen laughs. The comedians who once looked up to him are finally breaking their silence, and the truth is, shaking the whole industry. It all came crashing down in early 2024 when veteran comic Mark Curry stopped playing nice and told TMZ exactly what Harvey's team didn't want out there: that after 16 long years, Steve still hasn't apologized for allegedly stealing his work. Can you imagine holding that grudge for over a decade because your art got snatched by a fellow comedian? Wild. The joke at the center of all this wasn't just any throwaway gag. It was Curry's signature Halloween bit from 1999, crafted from his real-life stories back when hanging with Mr. Cooper was at its peak. Then, out of nowhere, Harvey performed nearly the same concept on Little Big Shots in 2015, like it came straight from his own pen.
For everything I'm telling you, that's why I can say I'm so freely.
Kid, I need another one. You here, get you another one.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Come on.
The audience laughed, cameras rolled, and the show went on. But the real ones in the comedy world, they knew that punchline already belonged to someone else. Curry said this was never about money or fame. It was about respect. 16 years later, that silence from Harvey still hits like an insult frozen in time. We saw Mark Curry standing at LAX, calm on the surface, but sharp with every word. He told TMZ that Steve Harvey never had the guts to face him about it, not once. He can have it, Curry shrugged, trying to sound unbothered. But that shrug, it carried 20 years of quiet anger and industry whispers that never really stopped. For years, comedians behind the scenes have been saying the same thing: that Steve Harvey takes what's not his, then hides behind bright studio lights and his superstar grin. The outrage might have faded over time, but the disbelief stayed. Because seriously, how does a man worth over $100 million still feel the need to copy someone else's punchlines? It's giving greedy, not genius.
Guy, in 2005 to 2008, right in there, Cat, we were looking at Cat like, wow.
He's so good.
Then came Cat Williams, the man who never bites his tongue for anybody. His explosive interview on Club Shay Shay didn't just stir the pot, it lit the whole thing on fire. Cat went straight for the jugular, saying Steve didn't just steal jokes, he stole an entire identity. The same Steve that went to go watch Mark Curry do his whole sitcom, then stole everything Mark Curry had, Cat told Shannon Sharp. Now Steve got a sitcom where he the principal and he wears a suit. No need for subtitles. Everyone watching instantly thought of hanging with Mr. Cooper. The resemblance wasn't just uncanny, it was undeniable. Hanging with Mr. Cooper, the ABC classic that ran from 1992 to 1997, made Mark Curry a household name as the high school coach turned principal who brought charm, humor, and heart to every episode. But just 3 years later, the Steve Harvey Show hit the WB, and guess what? Steve was suddenly playing a high school teacher turned principal, rocking those same sharp suits and standing in front of that same classroom backdrop. Coincidence? Please. The timing was too perfect to ignore. One show ended in 1997, and another was already airing in 1996, overlapping like a shadow that refused to move. To many comedians, it didn't look like inspiration. It looked like straight-up imitation. Cat Williams wasn't afraid to say what everyone else was whispering. Steve Harvey stole everything Mark Curry had and built an empire off it.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, he said.
Are you kidding me?
He said that he confronted you about it before, and then even
And
after
he
that,
still
he did it again.
ain't saying what.
That line hit hard, cutting through Hollywood's fake smiles like a blade. Fans didn't waste a second. They started posting clips of both shows side by side. Same setup, same vibe, same energy, just different names on the checks. And the internet went wild. But Cat didn't stop there. He took it even further, calling Harvey a man who wanted to be everything to everyone, but couldn't make it in Hollywood the way he dreamed. According to Cat, Harvey wasn't movie star material, he was just playing one on TV. Cat's jab might have sounded cruel, but it echoed a rumor that's been circling Hollywood for years, that Steve Harvey tried and failed to break into movies. When he couldn't conquer the big screen, he built his throne on television instead. But here's the thing, In comedy, stealing jokes isn't just shady, it's sacred betrayal. It's worse than bombing on stage or getting roasted by critics. Because when you steal a joke, you're stealing someone's voice. And in this case, people started whispering that Harvey might have done more than just take a joke. He might have taken an entire career.
He took my Winton. Took my Winton from me. He turned my son against me.
Meanwhile, Mark Curry wasn't sitting still. Teaming up with Cat Williams on the Dark Matter tour, he flipped years of pain into pure power. Those tickets that used to cost $50, now they're going for over $200 a seat, because fans realized these shows weren't just comedy sets. They were confessions from comedians who'd been burned in silence for too long. Curry told Willie D on a January podcast that he'd always suspected Harvey's team used to sneak into his shows just to study and copy his material later. But it wasn't about the money, it was about something uglier. "You want to be me? You want my style?" he said, his voice calm but cutting through the mic like a knife. That one line turned into an instant meme, spreading across the internet faster than any PR statement Harvey's camp could dream up. Steve Harvey's response was exactly what everyone expected. He brushed it all off like it was beneath him. He told reporters that Mark Curry needed to grow up and doubled down, saying he hadn't even been on stage since 2015. But that excuse only made things messier, because if he hadn't performed since 2015, then why did Curry's old material mysteriously pop up on Harvey's 2015 talk show and again on Little Big Shots? The dates didn't lie, and fans online sure knew how to count. As Curry and Cat Williams kept spilling more receipts, the ripple effect started spreading through the comedy world. One by one, more comedians began speaking up, some quietly, others with straight-up disgust.
Hey, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Well, Steve's learning that the hard way tonight. Steve's ex-wife, Mary Harvey, is angry, and she's going public.
Gary Owen, who once worked side by side with Harvey, broke his silence on his podcast and revealed a bombshell. His 2-week stint on the Steve Harvey Show barely covered SAG minimum pay. Meanwhile, he said, when he did Hip Hop Squares, he made 4 times that amount in just one day. That's not a small difference. That's exploitation disguised as opportunity. Owen didn't call Harvey out by name, but the shade was loud enough for everyone to hear. Here was a man who'd been grinding in comedy since the early 90s, walking away with peanuts while Harvey's empire grew to a whopping $140 million. The contradiction was glaring. Harvey built his image preaching hustle, faith, and self-made success, yet the people who helped craft that image were barely surviving behind the scenes. Gary Owen didn't just talk about low pay, he exposed how bad the treatment was behind the cameras. He said he was shoved into a dressing room so small it felt like a broom closet, while A-list guests and influencers got luxury suites with private bathrooms and catered meals. That's a hard image to square with the motivational preacher energy Steve Harvey loves to sell on his morning radio show, and according to insiders, that kind of double standard wasn't rare. It was routine. Multiple former staffers have spoken up, saying the work culture around Harvey was built on intimidation and fear. And who could forget that infamous leaked memo from 2017, the one where Harvey literally told his own employees, "Do not approach me."
I'd say that Steve Harvey was in a perfect position to help me get clemency. I wouldn't have to go through what I went through, but God's hand.
The message ordered staff not to talk to him in hallways, makeup rooms, or dressing areas unless personally invited. "I hate being ambushed," it read. When that memo went public, it shocked fans who thought Harvey was all smiles and sermons. To some, it sounded heartless and arrogant. To others, it was just him setting boundaries. But either way, the image of Steve Harvey, the people's comic, the feel-good king of daytime TV, took a hit that never quite healed. And as if that wasn't messy enough, his personal life kept adding fuel to the fire. The same man preaching integrity and faith had been married 3 times. His second wife, Mary Lee Harvey, claimed after their 2005 divorce that he left her broke and abandoned, even releasing emotional YouTube videos painting him as a villain in designer suits. Court records later showed she wasn't literally homeless, but the drama definitely cracked the king of clean comedy crown. Sure, Mary Lee Harvey ended up with some property and financial support after the divorce, but in the court of public opinion, perception is everything. Once a teary ex-wife tells the internet that her famous husband destroyed her life, the truth doesn't even matter anymore. The damage is done, and sympathy becomes the headline.
It's like haters. When you get haters, you know, people's opinion of you is none of your business. I have lots of hate.
Then came Marjorie Harvey, Steve's current wife, and with her, a past the tabloids just couldn't resist digging into. Reports resurfaced linking her to 2 former partners allegedly tied to major substance trafficking operations, with one of them even pardoned by President Barack Obama after serving decades behind bars. Now, nobody ever said Marjorie herself was involved, but people couldn't help noticing that wherever Steve goes, drama seems to follow close behind, even when he's dressed sharp and preaching about faith on camera. And for a man whose whole brand is built on moral authority, that's dangerous ground to be walking on. Insiders from his production companies have quietly whispered for years about how tightly his image is managed. Every photo, every quote, every laugh carefully controlled. Some even claimed Harvey's team would smile in your face during meetings, then turn around and pitch your ideas to producers like it was theirs. Sound familiar? That's exactly what Mark Curry accused him of doing back in the day. Only now, the game's evolved, with lawyers, contracts, and production credits keeping everything official. Suddenly, those old joke theft allegations don't look like isolated incidents anymore. They look like a pattern, maybe even a business model. Build an empire using other people's creativity, then rebrand it as self-made genius.
So I don't give them no energy. I give haters no energy. Steve ain't this, he think he this. You don't even know me.
To really understand how deep that runs, we've got to rewind to the 90s. Back when Steve Harvey was still hustling side by side with Bernie Mac and the kings of comedy. Back in the day, Steve Harvey, Bernie Mac, Cedric, the Entertainer, and D.L. Hewley were sold to the world as a tight brotherhood, the original kings of comedy. But according to insiders, that brotherhood ended the minute the stage lights went dark. Behind the scenes, it wasn't laughs and loyalty. It was jealousy, competition, and quiet betrayal. Bernie Mac, the powerhouse of the group, reportedly never trusted Harvey again after the tour ended. Word spread that Steve had tried to snake his way into Ocean's 11 by offering to take less pay just to replace Bernie. Can you imagine that? Undercutting your own brother for a Hollywood slot? Mac even told GQ in 2003 that Harvey was jealous of his rising fame and tried to sabotage him during key meetings. Of course, Steve denied it all, but too many people remember that thick tension on tour for it to just be gossip. Even Cedric the Entertainer later admitted that Bernie and Steve saw things very differently. Translation: they couldn't stand each other. And when you look at how their careers unfolded afterward, it tells its own story. Steve Harvey's career skyrocketed. Family Feud, best-selling books, talk shows, game shows. He became a media empire all by himself. Meanwhile, Bernie Mac was out here fighting health issues and industry politics just to keep his footing.
You know, he's a man with the power. He's in 60 markets. He's written these books. You know, he's socially connected with the programs and Disney and all these type people.
By the time Bernie passed away in 2008, Steve was already being positioned as the clean-cut heir to the throne, the so-called last king standing. But for those who knew the real story, that crown came with more shade than shine. Some comics quietly whispered that Steve Harvey's rise only happened because his loudest rival, Bernie Mac, wasn't around to stop him. But now, years later, Cat Williams is saying out loud what everyone else only dared to whisper, that Steve didn't just clash with Bernie, he tried to erase him. Ed Lover, one of Bernie's longtime friends, backed it up on his own podcast, saying Bernie personally told him that Harvey had called producers behind his back to steal roles. That's not competition, that's sabotage. And then Bernie's own daughter, Janice McCullough, stepped in publicly, thanking Cat Williams for honoring her father and having the courage to call out those who'd slighted him. She didn't have to name Steve, everyone knew exactly who she meant. Together, these stories painted a brutal picture. A man who preaches mentorship and brotherhood while allegedly undermining the very people who helped build his path. A man who talks about faith, gratitude, and perseverance while quietly rewriting comedy history to make himself the hero. And every time someone speaks up, whether it's Mark Curry, Cat Williams, or an ex-wife exposing his hypocrisy, Harvey's playbook never changes. He pivots straight to religion, posting cryptic videos about keeping your peace and quoting scripture about ignoring haters. But the question everyone's starting to ask now is, how long can he hide behind faith before the truth catches up? In January 2024, just days after Cat Williams' viral interview shook the internet, Steve Harvey hit the Family Feud stage with a smile that looked just a little too forced. Cameras caught him preaching to the crowd, saying, "You don't have to address your haters." To casual viewers, it sounded like another motivational sermon. But to anyone following the scandal, it sounded like straight-up deflection dressed as wisdom. The backlash didn't stop with comedians. It spread like wildfire. Former employees, ex-sidekicks, and even daytime show guests began speaking out. Gary Owen wasn't the only one calling out the low pay and shady treatment.
She used to hate, see, that's what I'm saying. I'm gonna tell it all. I'm telling all y'all. She said, and it was fact, she used to check dudes with big lips.
A former producer described Harvey's entire operation as a tight, closed circle where only a select few were trusted and everyone else was disposable. And that infamous leaked memo, it proved everything. Harvey literally instructed his staff not to approach him without an appointment, not to wait in hallways, and definitely not to walk beside him. For a man branding himself as the people's champion, that memo read more like a royal decree than workplace policy, and here's where the lines blur, because Steve's professional ruthlessness and his personal drama look almost identical. His second marriage ended in ugly public fallout, and his third began under a cloud of rumors. Mary Lee Harvey claimed Steve was cheating on her with Marjorie before their divorce was even finalized. Court filings never confirmed it, but the timeline, it raised more than a few eyebrows. Just 2 years after leaving Mary, Steve married Marjorie and immediately started selling the family man reborn image to the world. A clean slate wrapped in designer suits and Bible quotes. But not everyone's buying the redemption story anymore. Steve Harvey's gospel-flavored love story with Marjorie didn't just clean up his image, it became a business model. That whole redemption arc was packaged, polished, and sold right alongside his comedy brand, turning faith and forgiveness into cold hard cash. But while audiences ate it up, comedians who'd known him for decades were watching in silence, and their silence turned into resentment. To them, Steve's transformation from a blue-collar comic into a self-help millionaire wasn't inspiring, it was erasure. The man who used to sound like one of them suddenly started talking down to them, trading punchlines for sermons. Behind closed doors, insiders say Harvey was always calculated, even ruthless, cutting off old friends who questioned him and rewriting history to make sure his name came first in every partnership. That's why, according to those same insiders, the Kings of Comedy sequel never happened. Cedric the Entertainer publicly said, "Egos got in the way," but behind the scenes, people point straight to Steve's obsession with control. He didn't want to share the crown. He wanted to wear it alone. Now, with Cat Williams and others reopening old wounds, fans are starting to look back at Harvey's legacy with fresh eyes. How much of it was earned, and how much of it was carefully crafted illusion? So now the question everyone's asking, is Steve Harvey really a self-made mogul, or just a master recycler of other people's brilliance?
Man, but we moved on. We got new jokes. I got new jokes. That's what I do. I write every day, baby.
The accusations from Mark Curry and Cat Williams didn't just reignite an old feud, they shattered an industry myth. Because if Harvey's rise was built on borrowed jokes, recycled sitcom ideas, and underpaid colleagues, then every slick motivational speech about owning your destiny starts sounding faker than ever. And let's be real, the timing couldn't be worse for him. The more Harvey brushes it off as hate, the more people start digging. Old clips are resurfacing like wildfire. Bernie Mac calling him out years ago, Curry's 1999 stand-up bit that mysteriously mirrors Harvey's later shows, and Gary Owen's story about being stuck in that tiny dressing room. Fans are now stitching it all together online, frame by frame, year by year. And what's emerging doesn't look like coincidence. It looks like a pattern. But the most brutal part of all this isn't just about the material Steve might have lifted. It's about the people he allegedly stepped on to get to the top. The comedian who's no longer here to defend himself, and the wives who say he left them broken in his climb to the throne. Bernie Mac's daughter, Janice McCullough, said what everyone had been too afraid to say for years, and when she finally spoke in January 2024, it hit Hollywood like a thunderclap. Janice McCullough gave Cat Williams his flowers for doing what her father, Bernie Mac, never got the chance to do: say the truth out loud. She said Steve Harvey's so-called brotherhood was a one-way street, built on loyalty that only flowed when it benefited him. Janice made it clear she respected Cat for defending her father's legacy, because for years, too many people in Hollywood acted like the tension between Bernie and Steve never existed. But the real ones remember that GQ interview from 2003?
Very intelligent, very smart, he runs our tour. We got the best tour out. and he handled.
When Bernie subtly hinted that Harvey had tried to sneak his way into Ocean's 11 by offering to take a smaller paycheck, back then, it sounded like harmless professional rivalry. But when Ed Lover confirmed in 2024 that Bernie personally told him Steve really did make that call, it stopped sounding like ambition and started looking like full-blown sabotage. Bernie Mac passed away in 2008 with his reputation pure, respected, and untouchable. Meanwhile, Steve Harvey's empire just kept getting bigger. More shows, more money, more power. And only now, years later, fans are finally connecting the dots. What once looked like drive and hustle now looks like a calculated takedown of a rival, one who could have outshined him if given the chance. And that pattern doesn't stop with business. Behind the spotlight, the same moves played out in his personal life. Harvey's ex-wife, Mary Lee, once claimed he was already involved with Marjorie before their divorce was finalized. And while back then it sounded like tabloid gossip, the public had no idea what else was coming next. Marjorie Harvey's past wasn't spotless either, and tabloids made sure nobody forgot it. Her former ties to two men later convicted in major substance operations became front-page gossip. One of those men even served a life sentence before being pardoned by President Obama, while another was linked to the same criminal network. Overnight, the perfect family man image Steve had built started to look more like damage control than divine destiny. Insiders whispered that Steve didn't just marry for love, he married for reinvention.
I don't care, all the king horses and all the king's men cannot stop me from putting this.
Every chapter of his personal life lined up perfectly with the new phase of his career. Each wife didn't just join his story, she helped him rewrite it, polishing over whatever came before. And Mark Curry said he saw that same hunger up close during his 2024 sit-down with Willie D. Harvey's theft ain't about money, Curry said. It's about wanting to be me. That line cut deeper than any punchline ever could because it reframed the whole narrative. What if Steve Harvey's so-called divine success wasn't about faith or fate, but about an obsession with consuming the identities of other men who had what he didn't? Their charisma, their shows, their audiences who genuinely loved them. Cat Williams called it mimicry. Mark Curry called it envy. And by 2024, the industry had a new word for it too, a pattern. Meanwhile, Gary Owen, another veteran comic who once admired Steve Harvey, shared his own story that pulled the curtain all the way back. He said when he tried pitching comedy ideas for Harvey's talk show, one of Steve's producers cut him off instantly, saying, "We'll handle the sketches." Translation: don't bring creativity here unless it's coming from Steve. That wasn't collaboration, that was containment. The voices of other comedians were boxed up, rewritten, and filtered until only Harvey's name was left shining on the credits. That's the quiet kind of control that runs deep in every powerful empire. Make others invisible while pretending to mentor them. Behind the perfect smile and polished suit, the truth sounded more like a corporate machine than a community of creatives. And then there's that infamous 2015 memo, the one Steve sent to his own staff that started with "Do not approach me." He told employees not to speak to him in the makeup room, not to greet him in hallways, not to walk beside him in dressing areas, unless they had a scheduled meeting. For a man who built his career on being relatable, that memo was pure contradiction. He even tried to soften the blow, writing, "Do not take offense to the new way of doing business." But come on, the message was loud and clear. Stay out of his orbit. It sounded less like a friendly boss and more like a man obsessed with control, guarding his image like a billion-dollar brand instead of a human being.
Cocaine, they dropped the money laundering aspect. Because, they had me dead to write on money laundering, but they didn't even want to deal with it. It wasn't no use of, taking...
Year after year, more cracks keep showing through Steve Harvey's polished image. And suddenly, those emotional speeches about humility and faith hit very differently. The same man preaching loyalty and gratitude has ex-wives and fellow comedians describing him as cold, manipulative, and dismissive. Those cheerful, stay faithful videos sound hollow once you place them next to Mary Lee's heartbreak and Marjorie's tangled past. Even that leaked memo reads different now because you start to see the pattern. For decades, Harvey hasn't just told his story, he's directed it. Every chapter of his life has been carefully edited like a redemption movie. One scandal away from collapsing, yet somehow always rebranded just in time. And now, with people like Mark Curry, Cat Williams, Gary Owen, and even Bernie Mac's family all connecting the dots, the timeline feels impossible to ignore. Every controversy, every betrayal, every whispered rumor seems to lead back to the same instincts. control the spotlight, silence the opposition, and spin the story before the truth sticks. From his talk shows to Family Feud to those glossy relationship books, Steve Harvey has turned self-preservation into an art form. But this isn't the early 2000s anymore, this is the social media era. And in this era, receipts don't stay buried. Old interviews resurface, forgotten clips go viral, and buried wounds get reopened for millions to see. The world's finally watching the unedited version. And this time, Steve doesn't get to control the script. You can feel the tension building, like the air right before a storm. The more Steve Harvey tells people to ignore the haters, the more those so-called haters start sounding like witnesses. What started as a few scattered accusations has now turned into something way bigger. A full-blown dossier of joke theft, underpaid talent, shady contracts, and a long trail of people who say they were pushed out the second they stopped feeding his image. Even the cold wording from that infamous leaked memo, "for the good of my personal enjoyment," has become the ultimate symbol of how far Harvey's drifted from the very community that made him. This isn't just about one Halloween joke or one sitcom anymore. It's about legacy, loyalty, and who really earned the crown. Because if Steve Harvey's billion-dollar empire was built on borrowed success and broken promises, then the question isn't whether he'll survive the backlash. It's how many more comedians, producers, and maybe even ex-wives are out there waiting with receipts. So what do you think? Has Steve Harvey's spotless image finally reached its breaking point? Or will he find a way to talk himself out of this storm, like he always does? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Whose side are you on? Don't forget to hit that like, share, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this again. And until next time, keep your eyes open, because in Hollywood, the real punchline is always who gets the last laugh.